Welcome everybody. I thought this was a small country, Slovenia, but it looks like a big country here to me, with all these people, and I'm amazed that you sacrificed this fabulous sunny afternoon to come and listen to somebody talk about money and stuff like that. But I think it does show the enthusiasm and energy and passion that exists in a country like Slovenia to try and get things done, to put up on this screen. And that's fabulous that that happens, and it's very rewarding for people like me who travel around working in some countries where there is so much cynicism and depression and crisis going on that you wonder if it's ever possible to get films made. But my experiences in Eastern, Central Europe, where I've been working for a few years now, do enlighten me that there is something really exciting happening in this part of the world that is going to lead to some wonderful work on our screens, be it this screen, the cinema screen, or the little screen in our pocket, damn it, or whatever other screens we're looking at. I want to talk to you about mostly some of the external aspects of the process of screenwriting and writing for short films and for feature films, any length films, and a little bit about the internal aspects, which is basically about structure. But there is a problem for filmmakers, I think, being creative, artistic, sensitive people, in conveying their ideas and their goals and passions, stories, to the decision makers, the people who sign the checks. And there's no magic formula as to how to fix that, but I think there are some tools and some tips we can try and share with each other to try and help us present ourselves as artistic people who want to meet the business people in order to fulfill our dreams. Because it's not called the film business for nothing. It is art and it is commerce. And we cannot separate those two. And I was talking this morning to our group of filmmakers about how governments always have problems in placing the Ministry of Film in which department it should be, because it bounces like a ping pong ball between cultural departments and economic departments, because it is both. And that's about making something that has an audience, and we cannot forget that. We should not be enslaved by it, but we have to understand that if we're going to try and make a film that somebody at some point is going to need to give you some money to make it, or that you are going to persuade somebody to pay for a ticket when they go to the multiplex and they see Suicide Squad and Jason Bourne and your little film, and why should they go and see your little film? Because it's great and it's good and you've managed to achieve your goal, but it's a very, very competitive industry. It is a ludicrously competitive industry in terms of the number of projects that get written to the ones that actually get made. And this is a problem we have to face. So how can we find a way to be special within that and get noticed? Well, I think the first question I would like to explore is, why do we bother? Why do we do it at all? What's the point of telling these stories on screen? And I am talking here about narrative cinema. I'm not talking about experimental cinema or what used to be called video art, although that is utterly and completely valid for the short film format. And I was saying this morning how for short films there aren't really any rules apart from being fresh and original, because you can be experimental, you can have one shot of a fly crawling up a wall and maybe it'll work, or a leaf floating around in a bucket. You might not get a lot of people watching that, but maybe there'll be enough to justify the expense of making the film and helping you to do the second film. And there are a lot of really great short films that are not narrative films, but they work in their own rights as a little idea, a little experiment, a little visual joke, a little feast. But I'm talking specifically about narrative cinema, because that's what all the participants in our group are doing, and it's what probably most of you are aiming to do with your film ideas. The thing is, we're not just trying to tell these stories for the sake of it. We're not even doing it just for the fun of it. We're actually doing it to try and make sense of the chaos of the world. And the world is extremely chaotic at the moment. But it's always been true that storytelling is a tool to help us understand why we're here and why it's worth going on living and carrying on, in the same way as it was for the caveman coming back with his mammoth to feed the family and telling stories of his hunting trip, as it was in ancient mythology with the Greeks and Egyptians, and as it was in the Bible with Christ telling parables to help his followers understand the way of the world. It's just an extension of that. We're trying to make sense of the world. And in this chaotic, neurotic 21st century, it seems to me to be more important than it ever was to try and tell stories that have some substance and mean something and help us understand the world. And the reason I say that for now is because the conventional channels of information that tell us about the world are no longer trustworthy. The news, we don't trust the news anymore. We see Fox News or Canal Plus or Al Jazeera, and we get a completely different view of what is happening in the world. And because we have access to information now through the glories of the internet, there are huge suspicions that everything is part of some agenda that politicians or capitalists have provoked to make things happen. So we don't trust what is presented to us as the truth of the world, either on screen or in the newspapers or online. And it seems to me that we can strive to reach a greater emotional truth through the stories we tell. And my colleague Peter has been showing us some short films this morning that are very profound in terms of understanding how the world is. We saw a film called Listen, based in Denmark, about a refugee from the Middle East talking under her veil about domestic abuse and the frustrations of not being able to get any help from the authorities. And it touches you and you understand more about what is happening, even though this is a fictionalized story. So what we're doing matters. it has some import, but we can have some fun along the way. There's nothing wrong with us being entertained while we tell these stories. And Eastern Europe has been saddled with the unfortunate label of cinema of misery, that there is too much misery. And I think there are historical reasons for that there was a sense that if everybody dies, that it's more serious than everybody laughing, which is a shame. And I think we have to balance our reflections of the world, because there are tears and there is laughter in equal amounts, and we have to try and reflect every aspect of the world. And it's not going to be a more profound, intelligent film just because everybody dies. So, it particularly applies to endings of films, by the way. But I'm not advocating that every film should have a happy ending, but I think it's possible, even in the darkest stories, to have a sense of hope, a sense that it's worth continuing to stay alive and try and help each other. So that's something we have to grapple with a lot throughout Europe. It's not just an East European problem. Okay. So how do we get these stories across? How do we convince people to give us the money to do it? Well, in the development stage, which is usually development hell for most of us, in that we never know how long it is going to take for us to complete the script to the point where we can get the money. One has heard so many Oscar acceptance speeches about the 12 years it took to get the film ready. Rain Man was 17 years, Gandhi was 20 years, etc., etc. Really, really long periods of time where the project has bounced from one producer to another before the money has actually come through. We don't know how long the development will take. Hopefully with a short film it should be quicker, but it still needs that time to make it the best it can possibly be. You'd have to be a very rare genius to write your first version, and it's the one that gets shot. There's maybe 4 or 5 people in the world who can occasionally manage to do that. But it's a very subjective list. And as if it wasn't hard enough anyway to translate art into commerce, the other reality that we have to face about the film business is that it is not a rational industry, because there is this basic problem, which is that nobody knows the value of the product until it hits the market. It may be worth 0, or it may be worth $1 billion. Whereas if I make this glass or this pen, I can work out pretty much how much it will cost to produce and what sort of price it should be to sell it. And if I've got good marketing people, I've got a good sense of how many I can sell. Now, we pretend to do that with films, but it's such a wild guess. Financing films involves getting sales estimates from people who are supposed to know, sales agents, the distributors, about what the value of that product is in the country or format that it's in. And this is the classic ongoing formula as to how to arrive at the budget of the film. And they use all sorts of complicated technical ways of assessing that, usually by comparing your project to other films. One that's been successful, hopefully yours, one that's been medium, and one that's lost money. But the madness of the film industry is that the ones that make money make so much money they cover the losses of the ones that fail. Which is why the Hollywood studios exist, and despite their sort of dinosaur mentality and inability to adapt to the internet age, are still thriving, because they know the irrationality of the film business. They understand that most films fail and a few films make a lot of money. And they've kind of worked out that it's usually about 2 or 3 out of 10 or 12 that will succeed. So what do? They make 10 or 12 movies a year, and they know that 1 or 2 of them will be Suicide Squad or Jason Bourne, and they'll have a budget of $150, $200 million, and they'll have blockbuster marketing, and they will cover the losses of all the other films that they've released, and they will go on being profitable. And of course they're all financed by much larger entities. I mean, Disney makes much more money out of its theme parks than it does out of its movies, for example. So they have huge multinationals supporting them. And we don't have any model like that in Europe. There are no film majors. There are a lot of very small independent companies. There are a few medium-sized companies, and there are a few larger ones, but they're not what you'd call majors in financial terms. The reality of the European industry is that most film companies are staggering from one film to another in the hope that they don't go bankrupt so they can do their next film. That's something that's evolving a little bit, and it's more mature now than it was 20 years ago. And a lot of that, I must say, is due to the much maligned European Union support, which Sabina represents here, Creative Europe. The effect of Creative Europe on the audiovisual industry has been profound and not really noticed particularly, in supporting not only new projects and new filmmakers, but in supporting small companies to finance them through what they call the slate funding schemes, and helping them to choose their own projects and grow, and crucially to diversify. Because if you just make films, you're in a very high-risk business, but the ones that are successful have managed to diversify into... The best thing is long-running TV series. That's the most sure source of money, or documentaries, or music videos, or advertising, or online shows, etc., etc., and other more viable or more regular sources of income. So that's something that people setting up companies have to understand if they want to sustain themselves, that they need to take a long-term view and have a business plan of projects that they want to try and make over a few years, because then they'll be in a much better position to get the finance. And how wonderful that Slovenia is now in the European Union and is able to take advantage of these schemes for European support that are available. And how miserable am I, an Englishman, that my countrymen have voted to leave the European Union for all its problems, because in cultural terms it's been very supportive. And so I'm very sad that the Brexit vote has been successful. But we'll see what happens, because the lawyers can't work out actually how to do it. So we'll review that in a year or two and see what happens. Okay, so you're trying to write your short film script, your feature film script. What do? Well, there are stages in presenting your material. And different people have different ways of writing. Last one, Trier in Denmark, who we were talking about at lunch. He has the whole script in his head. He goes to his little wooden hut in the country with a couple of bottles of whiskey and writes for 2 weeks, night and day, and that's the script. And usually that's the shooting script, because he's one of those very rare people who has a very clear idea what he wants to do, and he seems to find audiences who like to follow that. For the rest of us, who are not these suffering geniuses, we have to try and do it differently. So it makes more sense to do it in stages. And I have a piece of paper here somewhere. And I want to talk to you about these different documents because they are the key to getting the money and persuading the decision makers that you have something special to say. Now, one of the problems in Europe is we don't have a common vocabulary in film jargon in the terms we use. So some of these have different names in different countries, but I'm going to use the Anglo-Saxon list, if you'll forgive me. And I will briefly define what these are and try and explain why they're important. A logline is 1 or 2 sentences just telling the essence of what your story is about. This is the same for short films, 1 or 2 minutes, or feature films of 2.5 hours. Sounds so simple, and it's really difficult. I worked in Amsterdam at something called the Winger Film Lab, and one of the exercises we did is we passed around the story and asked, amongst 20 people, asked each of them to write a logline without knowing anything about it. We got completely different stories of what people thought was important, what the essence of those stories actually were. So it sounds like the simplest thing in the world, but actually it concentrates the mind enormously in terms of trying to find what is the essence of your story. Nothing else but the story. Then, this controversial one, tagline, kind of an American term, and something we don't use much in Europe because it sort of sounds a bit cheap and cheesy, but actually it's really helpful. Tagline is what goes on a poster to promote the film, and it's not the story of what's happening in the film. It's something about the tone and style and genre that gives the audience a sense of what type of film it is that you want to try and present. And the reason we need these very short little phrases is because decision makers, they just want to quote the cliche 25 words or less. And those of you who saw The Player, Robert Altman's film, satire on the film industry, the studio executive, everybody's trying to pitch to him constantly. And he just says 25 words or less, 25 words or less. And indeed there was a funding scheme in Britain, British Screen, that was called 25 words or less, and that's what people submitted to get the development money for their ideas. It's kind of cheap, but that's the way the industry operates when there are so many hundreds and thousands of people trying to get their projects made. Another cliche is that when you get off the plane at Lax Airport in Los Angeles, the taxi driver pitches you the script on your way to the hotel because everybody's got a script out there. We're not quite that bad yet in Europe, and probably we have a more sensible idea of what is possible and not possible. But still, there are a lot more scripts floating around than films that could possibly be made or find an audience. So let me give you one or two examples. Okay, we're going to play a game. I'm going to read out some log lines and somebody has to tell me what the film is. In space, no one can hear you scream. That's easy. But it has nothing to do with the story. And what does it actually mean in space? No one can hear you scream. It's just a feeling, a tone. But it's just become one of those very, very well-known taglines. And it was what was on the poster, and it helped the film become a huge success. You don't get to 500 million friends without making a few enemies.
Social network.
Yeah, okay, he knows. Yeah. All right, I'm going to give you some difficult ones. Houston, we have a problem.
Apollo 13.
You thought this was going to be easy. One man struggled to take it easy. That's tough. Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Check in, unpack, relax, take a shower.
Cycle?
Well done. The remake, in fact, but yes. Okay. The longer you wait, the harder it gets.
The 40-year-old virgin?
Yeah, he's good. He's good. I'm also good at read.
Did you get this from a book or something, or maybe an editor or something?
I don't know, I'm just found it somewhere. Yeah. So using innuendo and of sex always sells, of course. They're young, they're in love, they kill people. Very good. On every street in every city, there's a nobody who dreams of being a somebody. Yeah, good. Here's one that will test you. Look closer.
American Beauty?
Oh, wow, yeah.
I should shut up probably, yeah?
No, you're good. Because it's a very strange one. Look closer. It's like, you know, when you're looking behind the curtains of the suburban American dream, there's all this craziness going on. Okay, that's enough of that. Right. So the point about the tagline, although it goes on the poster, it's a really good idea for you as screenwriters. Try and just play with that, with your own ideas, and see if you can come up with something, so that when you meet the big cheese at the Cannes Festival, it's like, oh, hello, yes, what's your film about? You can just throw that out. And usually the tagline's more effective than the logline, because it's sort of like, oh, I want to know some more about that. The whole point of these is to get people to want more. The problem we have as one of a huge number of problems we have as screenwriters is we want to say everything. We want to tell people everything. And decision makers don't want everything. They just want that. And they want just a little taste of what it is to see if they want to go to the next stage and invite you in for a proper meeting or accept your request for a meeting where you can actually pitch the project properly or send in the script or whatever it is that is the next stage for you. So it's all about compacting and being concise and being clear. A logline, by the way, is not an exercise in style. It's just about conveying information. So don't it's not something that wants flowery language. It's just information. The logline is what you use before the film is made to persuade people to take an interest in you. The tagline is to get the meeting, but it's also what's used after the film to encourage people, after the film is produced, to get people, persuade people to buy a ticket. Also relates to the title, of course. You need good titles, which is another very difficult problem, although not something you have to worry about too much at the development stage, because titles can always come later on. Synopsis, very controversial document, and nothing is cast in stone about what a synopsis is, but all I can do is give you my own advice about what I think a synopsis should be. Largely through my experience as a film buyer, which is how I started in the film industry in the 1980s, working for some large British production companies that all went bankrupt, by the way, but I don't take it personally. Where my job was to go out and buy video rights or UK theatrical rights, and I was just sent to these markets around the world saying, Christian, go and buy some films. Okay, how do you do that? And you go to the markets and the festivals and they have these catalogues. Now, of course, everything's online, but back then it was just like huge books. And you open it up, looking to see first if Tom Cruise was in it, or somebody you recognised, or some director. But then you read the log line, which they'd have at the top, and then they'd have a synopsis. And you know what you did as a buyer? You read the short ones first, because it was easier. Because you really wanted to be a very pretty girl over there. So you're constantly distracted as a buyer, because everyone's trying to get your attention. And shorter is better. My own advice is that a kind of ideal synopsis for a feature film, for a short film, I think I'd say something different. But for a feature film, I'd say between 300 and 400 words. That's not much. But I see synopses that are 4 pages long, and you feel, oh God, that's hard work to read that. And in a synopsis, you're trying to tell the story of the film. I'd say for a short film, 200, 250. It obviously depends on the length. If it's a 1-minute film, something different. For a synopsis, there's some guidelines I point out because I see so many recurring errors in them. Firstly, use paragraphs. Don't put it all in one paragraph. Lazy decision makers get headaches when it's sort of all one paragraph and the phone's ringing so they can't remember where they were. Paragraphs help you breathe. I mean, this is kind of basic advice, but it's fascinating how often people get it wrong. Don't put lots of names in there. If you put lots of names in half a page of text, it's impossible to understand it. So it's Jimmy meets Matt, who's fallen in love with Clara, but she's got a secret crush on Peter, who is actually gay and wants to run off with Emile. And you're going, I'm lost. I don't know who these people are. If it's 2 main characters' names, great. Secondary characters use their function in writing the synopsis. The window cleaner, the dustman, the murderer, the lover. And then it's sort of easy to understand it. But if you fill it with names, they'll lose interest and confusion will reign. It's difficult with ensemble films, choral films, sometimes they call it, where it's about lots of different characters. That's a tricky one in a synopsis because it's hard not to use all their names. You just have to make a decision about that, about what is the clearest, easiest way of conveying information where the film is about a lot of people, has like 6 or 7 main characters, with increasingly popular format. And then in a synopsis, avoid repetition. It's boring. It's not an exercise in style though. You don't want to use metaphors. If you say like a butterfly crashing into a window pane, she banged on the door, And you're reading it and thinking, well, is there a butterfly in this film? Because you don't, sometimes you're not sure if the metaphor is just expression or actually in the film. Just tell the story. Shorter sentences are better. I live in Spain and they jeer when I say that because they love long sentences in Spanish. But for synopses, it's much easier to understand with shorter sentences. Try and avoid and then, and then, and then. Or try and avoid cliches such as hilarious adventures ensue. Or killers and murderers. It's very difficult to find new ways of expressing that in a way that's not boring or not cliched. So you just have to find a way. Clarity is first. Style is quite a long way after. It's just conveying information. Because what's the job of the synopsis? The job is to get you the money. These are all sales documents. Well, actually, one of them's not. But all of them bar one are sales documents to get you the money. You have to sell yourself to, as the artist, as the creative person, to the people who sign the checks. And I cannot emphasize enough how vital these documents are. There is a sense, well, it doesn't matter because the script is the script, but to a large extent, the people who read and make decisions about projects want to read a logline and synopsis first before they will read a treatment or a script afterwards. So it also, by the way, serves as a wonderful way for you to clarify in your own mind what is important about the story, or that there is some problem in the story. Because you're writing the synopsis and you're saying, well, is it about him or is it about her? I'm not sure. And maybe you can understand some of the internal issues that are becoming problematic in the script. You're telling two separate stories that don't connect. Something like that happens quite a lot. And if you write synopsis, you'll have to deal with that. So when I did this synopsis course at the Bina Film Lab in Amsterdam, and it was supposed to be to get sales documents to take to the Rotterdam Film Festival, which we had at the end of the course, but it was more important in helping writers to understand what their own story was. All right, next is the treatment. Again, a very sort of elusive, enigmatic document that is different in different countries. If there is an industry template for treatments, which there isn't really, I would say that it's a document that is about 8 to 12 pages long. Now in Italy, for some reason, they write incredibly long treatments. I've never understood why. But when I worked at a development agency for the European Union, we used to get these 50, 60-page treatments. They were novels from Italian. There's some cultural reason for that eludes me. But I mean, it's easier to read the script. But a treatment which I would advise all screenwriters to try and write before you write the script to help you understand what your story is. You can be more into... you can take liberties a bit in writing a treatment, and by that I mean you can go a little bit more into sort of prose writing. You can say he thinks, which you can't write in a script. Because the treatment is trying to convey everything that happens in the script. You would have all the main characters, all the secondary characters by name. You could even have some lines of dialogue just to try and help explain what the project is about. And you can try and express what's going on inside people's heads, as long as you have a way of showing that in a script later on. But remember, this is helping you to get the money, is the idea of it. And when you, for example, I don't know how it works here in Slovenia, but if you apply to the European Union Creative Europe Single Project, you can apply for the treatment still. Yes. Yes. So you can get the money with the treatment if it's good enough and if you can convince people that you have the experience and talent to write a screenplay from that. So, any questions about those documents so far?
I have a question.
Please.
About synopsis.
Yes.
I'm not talking about the synopses which are in catalogs that everybody reads once the films are already out, but the synopsis that you show to producers, for example, do you write the ending or not?
The synopses I was reading in catalogs were not films.
Oh, they were not?
No.
Okay.
They were scripts, or they had shot a bit,
Uh-huh.
and they wanted more. So I, in the early days of video, it was that, but then it was pre-buying. So it was pre-buying material that had not been made.
So do you reveal the ending or not?
Yes, you do. Unless you have a very special reason not to. Because you're not writing for the audience who are going to buy a ticket to go and see the film. You're writing to somebody who wants to understand what your vision is, so they can understand it as much as possible and get the whole picture. So, not everybody agrees with me on that, but I think if you write, she has to make a decision about whether to go with the knight in shining armour or the drug dealer, ... I'm sort of frustrated, and it would have to have been something very fabulous for me to want to take that further if I'm not being told. My suspicion will be that the writer doesn't know what the end is, because this is before the film is made. But it's a completely valid question, and then everything I say, I don't want to be one of those. I probably am. I don't want to be one of those arrogant script people who, makes fascistic rules about scripts. Everything is a guideline, and it's a generalisation. But hopefully they are tips, and there might be particular cases where one does things differently. But by and large, the ending is good. Because in telling stories, we want to know what happens. And it's what Aristotle wrote about in the Poetics, this sense of catharsis, of a story well told, where we feel good about it. We feel, that's right, I was surprised, but it's the ending I want. Any other questions so far? Please feel free to interrupt. Step outline is the document that I would exclude from the list as a sales document, because in my interpretation of a step outline, it's for you to help you understand the stages of your script. A step outline, which is usually numbered, is a sequence of the sequences in the film, of the scenes and the sequences. But they're usually very difficult documents to read for somebody who doesn't know what the project is, because they don't have the narrative connection that a treatment has. You know what the project is, and you know what the sequence is, so you know what has led from one sequence to the next. So it's a very valid form of helping you find the structure of what your script would be, but it's not useful as a sales document because it's usually rather baffling. So I would kind of exclude that from the list of sales documents. A scriptment, which is a really ugly word, is a mixture of this and this. It's usually because somebody hasn't had time to write the script before the deadline for delivery to the Slovenian Film Agency or Creative Europe or whatever it is. And is half and half. Sometimes it's the script without the dialogue, or sometimes it's pages of treatment and then pages of action. It's not very satisfactory, but in the real world we have deadlines, and if you don't follow those deadlines, you don't get the money. It's very simple, straightforward. In Brussels they are so strict about that. It says by midday on August the 24th, and if it's 12:30, if it's 12:05, you're out. You're not even considered. So we live in a world of deadlines, and we have to deal with that. And then the script. Well, obviously the script is the blueprint for the film, and to quote the rather tired cliche on Alfred Hitchcock being asked what is the three most important elements in a film, the answer is the script, and the script. This is what all this is leading to. The thing with the script is, it's so hard to complete the script. Less hard with a short film because it's shorter, but for a feature script, it takes a long time. It takes a lot of sweat and tears, and takes a lot of dead ends before you arrive at what you want. And you're so exhausted, you're so relieved that you've written the end. You just want to send it off to the producer, to the agency. I've done it. Mistake. You mustn't send it off. You mustn't submit it anywhere until you're happy with it. Because the fact that you finished the first draft usually doesn't mean it's ready. And so many good projects have been ruined by them being submitted prematurely while there are still problems in the script. Why is that such a problem? Because lazy, neurotic decision makers hate reading a script twice. So if they get the first draft of your script and they say, well, we don't really like this because nothing's really happening in the second act. And then you go, oh, right, okay. And so you rewrite the second act and you send it back 2 months later. And, oh, it's hard to read the same script again. You're already against it because it's been resubmitted. So this is development hell. This is why we need to be very, very patient and be confident that we have the best possible version of the project before we submit it for analysis. Let me just quickly say something about submitting your project, because usually when we're applying for money to agencies, it's not, we don't just turn up with a piece of paper and slap it on someone's desk. We might do that if we have special relationships. It's usually about submitting it online now, and usually you want to submit a letter with it saying what it is. Don't write a long letter. Just write a very short letter saying, here is my idea. It's a romantic comedy set in Slovenia or whatever. Don't give them too much. And then we have the problem of when you start badgering people, asking people for a response because people take so long to reply. And that's a difficult one too. So don't start being difficult 1 week after you've submitted it. People need time to respond to things. Always good if you can get to know the person you're approaching. I'm talking about producers and funding agencies and everything really that has resources to help fund you. But the reality is the different decision makers have different priorities. And so you have to know who you are submitting to try and get the support. And if I just select a few of those, if you're finding a producer, the temptation is to give a producer a project because of previous film that he or she has been involved in. But usually they don't want to make the same type of films they've just made. Sometimes they do. I worked with a producer who made a little film for Polygram called Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. It was very successful for Polygram, about a group of transsexuals travelling across Australia in a bus. And every day in his office he'd get transsexual dramas. And he'd done that. He wanted to do something completely different, so they were just rejected without being read. So obviously personal relationships are the best thing, and you're in a country that one of the advantages of being a small place is it's not that difficult to get to know the people who matter. Most of all producers, because you can't make a film without a producer. And it's possible to connect with them, but let me say that we have to be sensitive about setting up working relationships, that making films is a long, hard road, and however sophisticated our technology, whatever brilliance the mobile phone in our pocket has, and databases that you can access, films get made because people want to work with other people that they like. It's a people industry. And making a film takes so long that you want to work with somebody that you're going to have to spend 6 months, a year, 2 years, even more working with. So you better get on. So establish a relationship. If you're English, you meet them and talk about the weather. I don't know what the Slovenian equivalent of that is, but don't jump straight in there and explain what's so wonderful about your script. Try and connect on a human level with the people you want to work with. Big agencies in the European Union, it's more difficult to do because it's more an online thing because of the vast volume of stuff they have. But you can meet those people. They come to all the markets and festivals. You can introduce yourself and say, "Hello, Sabina's here," and they're people as well. And human connection is always going to be the real reason that people make films. I saw Robert De Niro interviewed about that, and how do you decide which films to make? And he didn't say, because I like the script. He said, well, because it's somebody I like being with. That was a simple answer. Part of that is festivals and markets. Now, I'm very lucky to have this job at the Scripties program, which is a Polish-based training program that's now starting its 11th year, where we select a dozen projects from Central and Eastern Europe, and we develop them over an 8-month period with a week's stationary workshop in a remote corner of Poland, that both Matthias and Susanna have experienced, because they were participants on that scheme. And then we work online, and then we bring the participants to the Berlinale Film Festival in Berlin in February, and then we work online, and then we bring them to the Cannes Film Festival in May, the biggest film festival in the world. And that's often been seen as controversial. Like, people say, well, why are you taking writers to film festivals? And it's absolutely valid to do so. It can be quite intimidating to be a screenwriter at a film festival, but it's very useful primarily to see how the industry works. I think at the end of the day it's a market, people buying and selling films, just like apples and oranges, and they have their stands and they're selling films or buying films, and it's just the same, it's just that it's bits of paper or online documents. And it's extremely useful for writers to be at the coalface of the industry and meet the decision makers and all the people in between, the sales agents, the distributors, the marketing people. They all have professional ways of helping your film to find an audience. And in the past, there's been this sense that, no, I'm the writer. I don't want to deal with the mess of the industry. Oh no, that's dirty. It's no longer valid to say that. You cannot be the screenwriter in your little hut on the top of the hill, being the artist. If you want to do that, be a poet. And that's fine, it works. But if you're going to be a screenwriter, you have to understand something about the way the industry works. And so a short film festival like this is fantastic, because being a screenwriter is basically quite a lonely profession. We're on our own, staring at this cursor on the screen, trying to find the magic words that will fulfill our dreams. And it's wonderful to network and share those agonies with each other and inspire each other and collaborate, because film is about collaboration. As writers, we're at the birth of those ideas, usually, sometimes with the director, sometimes with the producer. But we cannot get that blueprint turned into a lovely building without the collaboration of lots of other people. So I went off with a bit of a tangent there. I was talking about the different response from filmmakers. When you approach a producer, you say, I've got this project. The producer's skills are in attracting money and finance to the project, but they will be thinking, how could I, firstly, do I want to make this? Well, yes, I like this person, so I'd like to explore further how to make this. How can I do it? Who can I apply to? Who would be appropriate? Where can I get the money? Now, it's in the nature of the job that a producer will have a more conservative view of the industry than you will as a screenwriter, because you have these expensive, wonderful ideas about what you might be able to do, but the producer has to turn that into money. So he or she has to approach banks and salespeople, and somehow, with the help of your wonderful log lines and taglines and synopses and treatments, persuade other people to part with money to make the film. So they will tend to take a more conservative view of it than you will. So it's just, that's how it works. If you're looking for a director for your project, I mean, very often you are the director, especially for short films, but if you're looking for a director will be thinking about their career trajectory, about, will me making this film enhance my career as a director? And so you have to seduce them about why that will be possible. If you're applying to a national funding, which I guess is the Slovenian, is it called Film Agency? Yeah, Slovenian Film Agency. Their criteria, I don't know what the current state is, but most state subsidies and subventions are more interested in critical kudos and festival success than commercial success, because it's to reflect on the nation that you have artistic success, so one can emphasize those aspects of your project, as opposed to when you're applying to banks, sales agents, distributors, who are basically interested in the commercial potential of this. Will it make money? Can I get it in a multiplex, or is it just going to show in one little festival and then disappear? So you have to adapt the way you present yourself and your project to these different people according to their status. Casting is another element. The cast is, if you're lucky enough to be able to go for people who have a reputation and have carry some weight in terms of being in your film. And by the way, actors need work, so don't be afraid of approaching well-known people. If they like the project and they have some degree of integrity, they'll go for it if they think it reflects well on their career. So it's about their career trajectory. It's also because they like you and they're free in the money that you're shooting. But don't shy away from that. So it is worth you as screenwriters going to as many markets and festivals and events as possible. You never know what will come out of it. One little tip, which is kind of irritating, but I'll say it anyway, is get name cards saying Mateusz, screenwriter or director, just with your email address or phone number, if you like. Because networking is about blah, 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 blah. Did you see the match last night? Yeah, it was great. Oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm a screenwriter. Oh, okay, bye. But before they go, if you can do the card exchange, it's an excuse to get back in touch with them. It sounds like, you're selling shoe polish or something, but it's actually really helpful in this day and age when there's so many thousands of people. And it's very cheap and easy to do now. Just to get a little card, pick a name and address it. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say, I see lots of scripts that just start at page 1, and I think I can't remember who this is by. I don't even know what the title is, because it's just gone to do a cover page. Again, these kind of idiot notes, so forgive me. But I see lots that the title of this script is, my name is this, contact. If there's a production company, you would put that. If you've received some developed with the assistance of, you put that, because that always attracts attention if you've received a bit of money. And put the page numbers on. So many people forget to put the page numbers on. And you just get really irritated by that. There are different ways in terms of the presentation of the script itself, but there are some free ones to download on the internet. You don't necessarily need Final Draft or one of the other things which are expensive and very good, but presenting a script in a recognised industry format is essential for you to be received seriously if you're going to professional sources of finance. Okay. I want to just repeat, forgive me, participants from this morning, I just want to repeat and add something to something I was saying this morning about short films, which is Regular. Sorry, I'll do it. Some of the problems I perceive quite often in reading short film scripts that hinder their prospects of getting made. And I actually forgot one this morning. And I realised that it's about laws. So that's kind of an accident. A lot of the short film scripts I read are too long. A lot of the short films I see are too long. It's a paradox. Short film too long. That's so often the case. And usually it's because the filmmaker's been over-ambitious in what they are trying to achieve. It's completely understandable that you want to cram in all your wonderful ideas into a short film. It's very, very difficult to do so. And while of course you want complete creative freedom, you also have to understand the realities of the industry and the logistics of getting films made. So if you have a 15-minute script set on 4 continents, 2 of which are underwater, I mean, you're going to be in trouble because it's going to be too expensive. If you're set in one room in a hotel in Ljubljana, great in terms of the cost, as long as the story is strong enough to get attention. Of course, your chances of getting it made are massively higher. The cheaper it is, although I'm not going to say make cheap films. It's just common sense about what is possible for the average budget of short films wherever you are working, in Slovenia or somewhere else. Next problem I see is too many words, too much dialogue. This is the basic problem in all screenwriting in Europe, too many words. I read for an English director whose film's been nominated for Oscars, so he's represented in the States, and he gets a lot of Hollywood scripts, and he gets a lot of European scripts. And it's fascinating. The European scripts are much heavier because they've got more pages and more words. And I'm not saying American scripts are better, because we can accuse them of all sorts of formulaic, bland, boring superhero stuff. But my God, they know how to tell stories visually. And that's ingrained somehow in the American culture for all sorts of historical reasons to do with where the industry started from, with a producer-led industry of filmmakers carrying cans of reels of film, the 10-minute reels, from fairs to fairs across America. And so it was the producers who looked at what the audiences wanted and created films to satisfy the audiences, rather than the European tradition, which comes out of the weight of our literary heritage and because of the auteur theory, the French giving us their genius filmmakers, but creating a sense that obscure intellectual directors is the thing to be, when there's only a few people who can really do that successfully. It's a bit controversial. I forgot myself. The S, I forgot the S this morning. Choose safe. Be crazy. Surprise us. Don't do what you think will be okay but kind of predictable. More than anything with a short film, we want to be, oh, I didn't see that coming. We want it with every type of film, but particularly with a short film. If after 1 minute we think, oh, I know where this is going, and then we feel very irritated if it just does that. So we want you to take risks. And this talk is supposed to be about the external aspects of the film industry and how to sell yourself, but if you'll indulge me, allow me to just go one little bit into the internal aspects of screenwriting. I want to talk about, very briefly, a structural element of scripts that seems to me to be very important. And it's these two Greek gods, Apollo and Dionysius. And this comes out of, it was man old Friedrich Nietzsche who identified the conflict and balance between Apollo and Dionysius. He was mostly talking about music when he was writing, the dynamic between them. But it does apply to screenwriting, and I've had the pleasure of working with an American screenwriter called Michael Schiffer, who wrote Crimson Tide and a bunch of other good American movies, who alerted me to this sense of how to balance the content of your project in a way that is easy to understand, but also crazy and mad and wonderful. And as represented by these two guys. Now, Apollo is this good, sweet boy. He's very good looking, he writes poetry, he's good at maths, he's sensible, he's rational. He's the boy that your mother would like your daughter, your sister to marry, because he's he's nice, and he's rational, and he's sensible. Dionysius, on the other hand, is this drunken, crazy man, bearded, lustful, naughty, doing crazy things. He's the god of wine. Lust, is it? All those things. And to write a good screenplay that works for an audience, for decision makers, you need a balance between these two. You need the sensible, rational stuff where the story works, the story makes sense. But you have to, if you're going to really get the pulse rating, and to get people sitting on the edge of their seats and to argue about the film afterwards, you have to inject Dionysius in there as well. You have to have madness and craziness and stuff that surprises us. And the way Michael Schiffer described this to me was, these two guys are trying to ride a canoe down the river, blue, and it's kind of pretty easy to begin with, but then they hit the rapids and the waterfalls, and it's pretty easy there, but then when it gets dangerous, Dionysius is saying, woo, let's go over the waterfall, let's do, and Apollo's saying, whoa, wait a minute, let's go this side so we don't submerge ourselves. And you want Dionysius for the fun, but you want Apollo to stop the canoe from actually sinking, so that it retains, so that you get to the end of the journey and the end of your film. And what do I see in so many scripts? I see too much Apollo and not enough Dionysius. So I would urge you to not be too safe, and to try and get that dynamic somehow in balance. It's a very abstract way of talking, but being safe is usually boring, yeah, and it's predictable. And so, oh, I've seen that. People will say, oh, another serial killer, another crazed superhero or crazy man. And I will just leave you with that thought of those two elements, which seem to me to be vital. Don't forget the madness and surprise that makes the audience eyes pop open and get involved in your story because you're surprising them. I would now like to say one or two words about genre. This is about choosing the project that you're trying to write. And genre is a word that has lost its original meaning and become a kind of term of abuse in cinema, indicating second-rate movies. It's a completely inappropriate use of the word, because genre is simply a guide to try and help the audience understand what type of film it is, so they can choose what to see. And they'll be doing it tonight with the short films here. They'll say, oh, what is this? They can read a logline, they'll look at a poster, or they'll try and make a decision about what to see. And that's what genre is about. But there are innate problems in all genres, and it's worth just being aware of those. But it's also worth knowing what the genre of your film is, because you will be asked, so what kind of film is it? And we're kind of reluctant to do that because we don't want our film to fit into a neat little box. But it's just a convenience. It's just a way of telling people what it is that we're trying to do. It also relates, by the way, to pitching. I haven't spoken much about pitching because most of this is written stuff, but it also relates to talking about your film. What I was saying at the beginning, about 25 words or less. One useful way, if you've got the quick verbal pitch, the 25 words or less, or you just meet a producer or a distributor or somebody and you want to get the longer meeting, is to identify the film you are trying to make by reference to other films. Now again, that's something that people don't really like doing, but it's a useful shorthand. So the thing is, do not say, my script is like Suicide Squad. Because what's the point of that? I mean, Suicide Squad exists, and it's very popular, and it's kind of banal, but so there's no point in it. It only makes sense if you compare it with more than one film that is completely different. So if you say my film is like somewhere in between Suicide Squad and Finding Dory, then people go, oh, well, that's weird. What the hell's that? As I say, we don't like doing that, but it's the kind of shorthand that is often required in terms of us trying to explain what the genre is. If we can say it's a romantic comedy, it's a horror film, great. There's nothing wrong with that. It's kind of good. Mostly we're writing drama. Okay, drama is what we're good at, mostly in Europe, and that's kind of huge. Open list. But if you will have more chance of success if you can know yourself what the genre is. Just a few quick points, though, about different genres. Comedy, the most successful genre in the world. and you can pretty much guarantee that every country that makes films, probably the most successful films are comedies. That's the plus. Minus, they don't travel. It's very hard to sell comedies outside your own country because we all have specific senses of humour. Maybe it's different with former Yugoslav countries. I mean, do you share a sense of humour with Croatia, Serbia? Do the comedies travel a bit better here?
Yeah.
Because you have a shared cultural past. So maybe you're in a slightly better position. Like Scandinavia shares certain sort of senses of humour, although there is rivalry. But by and large, comedy is a national thing, and you're very clever if you can get it to cross boundaries. Next hugely, wildly successful genre, horror. I live in Catalonia in Spain, and they had a crisis with their funding. Well, everyone's always in permanent state of crisis, of course, with their film industry, but they had a particularly serious crisis with no money, and some new young filmmakers about 15 years ago said, "Sod this, we're going to make low-budget horror films." And they created a kind of whole new genre of horror that was wildly successful and has continued to this day with some very, let's say, artistic, new wave kind of horror films that are really, really clever. But the problem with horror is you're always stuck with the same elements that create horror on screen, and it's very hard to change those or to extend them. It's creaking doors, it's nighttime, it's subjective cameras moving through leaves, it's cats coming in and spilling the milk, or it's the pretty girl in the nightie opening the fridge and the monster jumping on her from behind. It's very hard to find new ways of expressing horror. Most horror films follow the adage of don't show the monster until as late as possible. It's generally agreed that the first big blockbuster of modern times was Steven Spielberg's Jaws, 1976 maybe. And apparently the first cut of that was just the audiences burst into laughter because the shark was so rubbish. It was just like a silly toy shark that you'd have in your bath for your kids, because they didn't have the technology back then to create a convincing shark. So it was recut, so you don't actually see the shark until very late. You just see the fin or the water, and you have the doom, doom, doom. And that was the key to making it the most successful film ever made at the time. But hard to be original, hard to create a monster that's something we haven't seen before, but always a successful, commercially viable genre that will get you into the multiplexes. And there are lots now of specialised horror film festivals that are very successful. We have one in Spain, down in Sitges, huge audiences for all kinds of horror films. And I'd include fantasy in that as well. The fantasy is wonderful to use in films. It's a great tool to have. But both in horror and fantasy, the biggest mistake I see is people do not retain the internal logic of the world they have created because they want a big climax in the third act. So the audience has to know what the rules of that world are, and that has to be consistent through the film. You can't have a superhero who can, make people invisible, and then later on somehow sort of explodes the whole world, because we didn't see that he could explode the whole world early on. You have to be consistent in the fantasy, otherwise we just, oh, it's ridiculous. We don't believe it. You have to be careful of that. Action adventure is something we're not very good at in Europe, usually because we don't have the money. We just don't have the resources to do that in Europe, so unless you're very well connected, it's something that's will be very hard for you to get funded. When I was in Romania in June, I was talking to the producer of Mad Max Glory Road, which was a film I didn't think I'd like at all, but actually I really enjoyed it. It was visceral sense. Did you see it? Yeah. And I said, how long was the script on that? Because there's not really any dialogue at all. It's people going, And I said, what was the script? And he said, oh, no, there wasn't a script. I said, well, there was no script. And how much was the film? Oh, $120, $140 million, something like that. And he said it was George Miller, the director, had insisted, there probably was a script somewhere, but insisted that there was no script circulated to the actors or anyone else, or to the studio, which I think was Warner Brothers, because he didn't want them to interfere. He said there was a really good storyboard, because the film is a chase. Really good chase. And so I was amazed that there's that amount of money spent on something. But that's people who have power. You know, they can do that. I wouldn't advise you just to do a storyboard. It's very hard to get the money. Something that's missing in Europe hugely, family and children's films. There's a very big demand for it and very few successful examples of it in Europe, because we're all watching Pixar animation, genius stuff, absolutely wonderful screenwriting and execution, and we haven't found a very smart way of presenting those family films, because most of the scripts that I see in that genre, if I can call it a genre, are condescending towards children. They're sort of environmental, educational, pat you on the head. You're going to have some fun, but you've got to learn something. And the genius of some of those Pixar and I guess the older Disney films is that they had that. Always there was a message, but it was so subtle that the kids don't feel they're being preached to. They're smutty, they're dirty. If you look at a film like Shrek, it's very subversive. It's monsters fighting and stuff. Kids love that. They love to get down and dirty. So if you're going to write for children, which I would advise you to do because there is this huge demand for it, don't be too polite. Don't be too either. But understand the kids' mentality that they like to be naughty and they like to get down and dirty. Historical films and biographical pictures, what we call biopics, very popular in Europe because we all have such complex histories and we all want to tell stories about the past. But the question you have to ask yourself if you're doing a historical project, and historical, by the way, is 1999. I've got one of those that I'll be talking about later in the week. That's historical because we live in a different world with different hairstyles, different mobile phones, different cars from 16 years ago. Does this film about the past have any relevance to the present? You have to ask yourself that. Does it mean anything? Is it? Does it relate to what's happening in Syria today, for example? Does it echo issues of refugees and immigration that are happening today. If it doesn't relate to the present, you're really in trouble, because how can a 16-year-old kid try to decide what movie to see? Why should he go and see some old war film? There are great stories to be told about our collective pasts, but you have to make it relevant for contemporary audiences. You also have to understand that any historical film is on average 30% more expensive than a contemporary film because of the cost of recreating the past. Biographical pictures, biopics, enormously popular, the film of people's lives. Very, very difficult to condense somebody's life into a 90 or 100 minute format, because people don't live their lives in neat 3-act structures. People's lives are chaotic. So people try and cram everything in. To start with them being born in poverty and then suffering as a young person, and then having a degree of success, and then getting addicted to God knows what before cynical old age or early death. And it's very difficult to present somebody's life in that form. I always think that TV miniseries is a much better format for biographical pictures, where you can show different ages of the life, unless you home in on one particular period of somebody's life and somehow reflect the whole life in that time. I'm working on an Irish script at the moment about a nun called Sister Genevieve, who ran a school in Belfast right through the 90s during the Troubles, the Civil War in Ireland, and managed to keep this school going despite the bombs and the tension with the British and with the IRA. It's a remarkable story, and the first draft was her birth to her death. And now, I don't know how many, 15 drafts later, it's down to 8 months of her life. And that was the process that we had to go through to find the story that works. But that's development. That's what we have to go through. Okay, I'm going to finish soon. I want to show you just one little clip, so we have something to look at. But let me just say a couple of other things. When you submit a script to an agency or even a production company, the person you submit it to is not necessarily the person who will read it. It depends who it is, of course. But because of the volume of material that's received by agencies, they have to use readers and assessors to look at stuff. So often the person who actually signs the checks in funds or in big production companies or in TV stations or Netflix, I wish, Amazon, the newcomers into the industry. There are readers. I've been a reader for years, and usually the decision whether to proceed with a project is based on the reader's report. So you have to think, when you're submitting a project, that somebody is going to write their own logline, their own synopsis, and their own comment. And the easiest thing for them to do is to say reject, because then they don't have any work. Pass. So your job is to find a way amongst all those submissions to get them to say something good about it. And in our own sort of insecurities as human beings, it's much, much easier for us to criticize something and find something wrong with it than to say why we like it. And I face this problem a lot as a script editor and as a as an assessor, I just want to say, yeah, I like it. But that doesn't work. You have to find ways of doing it. It's so easy to say the script falls apart in the third act because it doesn't. We don't know what happens to this, and it becomes two stories, and there's no closure for these characters, and it's open-ended. Easy to find problems, and you've got to deal with that. You've got to have a story that doesn't allow them that opportunity. It's got to be a story that works, where they're going to say, yeah, the story works, and I've never seen anything like this. It's in a genre that I think will be commercially viable, but I've never seen this. So to be original is very, very difficult. And there are folklorists and script gurus who insist that there are only 7 stories. I won't run through them, but it's based on ancient myths, and that everything is a variation of these ancient myths, and we're very restricted in the stories we tell. Well, it's not true, because we need structure. We need a story to have a beginning, middle and end, and you can follow whichever script guru you like, and there are so many to choose from now, and Sid Field says there's 3 acts, other people say there's 5 acts, other people Frank Daniel said there were 8 sequences, John Truby says there's 22 elements. There's lots of systems that you can adapt. They're all useful if they work for you, but you have to have your story first before you can utilise those script gurus' systems. I don't want to knock them completely. I treat them lightly, because I think they have useful things to say, as long as they're not cast in stone and fascist about what you have to do in a script. I think Aristotle still applies in terms of a story being well told and leading us to a closure that works for us. Okay, I will leave you with one passing thought. Just to simplify structure, we don't need all those designs of McKee, which this book is very hard to read. For me, that's structure. Somebody wants something and has trouble getting it. If you've got that, you've got a story to tell. That's all it is. And you will have a chance of succeeding if in narrative script writing you've got that. Somebody needs something and they have a problem in achieving it. They might succeed or they might fail. But that's the essence of structure as far as I'm concerned. Okay, thank you very much for your attention on this hot afternoon.